Welcome to this short summary on visitor and trip profile from the Scotland Visitor Survey. I'm Jackie Souter, Senior Insight Manager at Visit Scotland, and I'll be taking you through this short summary today. We're providing lots of rich insight from the survey, and you'll find that on our website, visitscotland.org. But here I'm going to focus on some highlights from the visitor and trip profile of visitors to Scotland. Firstly, let's look at some background to the visitor survey. It was commissioned by Visit Scotland and managed by independent research agency Progressive Partnership Limited. And overall, their interviewers intercepted over 11,500 visitors face-to-face at 135 sampling points across Scotland, from Shetland in the north to Dumfries and Galloway in the south, and many places in between. Those interviews comprised a short survey, and visitors were then invited to take part in an online survey when they returned home. And we received over 3,000 online surveys, which represented a very healthy response rate. This survey gives us great opportunities to speak to visitors when they're actually here in Scotland, and they can tell us about their experiences on a variety of topics from the start to end of their visitor journey. This survey focuses on overnight leisure visitors, with both day visitors and business visitors being out with the scope of this research. Before we look at where Scotland's visitors come from, firstly, a technical note, as it's very important to ensure that the overall data from the Scotland Visitor Survey is representative of all Scotland's visitors. So in order to achieve that, we had to weight the overall survey data. To do that, we used 3-year annual average data from the International Passenger Survey and the Great Britain Tourism Survey. And this has resulted in an overall profile of 73% domestic visitors and 27% international visitors. And you can see the resulting overall market proportions on this slide. For more details on this, please see the technical appendix to this research. As I mentioned earlier, this survey focused on overnight leisure visitors to Scotland, so it's not surprising that 85% took a break here purely for leisure purposes, with our Europeans even more likely to do so at 91%. 1 in 8 overall were visiting friends and relatives, with this being highest for the UK and long-haul markets. 25% overall were first-time visitors to Scotland, but this does vary hugely by market, which I'll outline a little bit later. And we also asked our visitors what type of trip they were on, with 1 in 10 saying they were on a trip of a lifetime, so a very special holiday indeed for those people. And finally, post-pandemic, we were also interested in looking at the trend of leisure, those people combining a business trip with a leisure trip or working remotely as part of their break. And we can see that 5% overall were on this type of trip. We know that Scotland has traditionally attracted an older visitor profile. We can see here that half of our visitors were aged over 55, and this is primarily driven by our domestic, UK and our long-haul visitors. We were also able to look at the results by life stage, and here we can see that we did have 15% who were in that younger age group and were pre-nesters. So these are 16 to 34-year-olds with no children in the household. Visitors spend on average just over a week in Scotland, with the average party size being 2.8 visitors, although just over half, at 56%, were in a party size of 2 people. So let's take a look at the party composition of our visitors now. 2/3 of visitors were travelling with a spouse or partner, with 16% of visitors having children under 16 in their party. We saw that visitors were also travelling with other family members, parents or grandparents, sisters or brothers, etc. And the overall family group made up about 30% of the total. Of course, we know that pet ownership rose during the pandemic, and we can see that 11% of our visitors took a pet on their break with them. The vast majority of these were dogs and was higher for people living within the UK, with around 14%. Solo travellers, so people travelling alone, made up around 1 in 10 of our visitors, and those with a long-term health condition, impairment or disability made up around 9% of our visitors. Focusing on the UK visitor profile now, we can see that 10% of our UK visitors were first-time visitors to Scotland, with around 99% of those coming from out with Scotland from the rest of the UK, as we know that most Scottish residents have taken a break or holiday here before. We can also see that 37% were regular visitors to Scotland, and these are our most loyal visitors and are people who visit at least once a year. For Scottish residents, this figure actually rises to 69%. This year we also asked a question about people's perceived knowledge about Scotland, with a quarter claiming to have excellent knowledge about what to see and what to do here, and that's perhaps not surprising for our regular visitors. Moving on now to look at our European market visitors, we can see that the profile is quite different to those of the UK market, with half of Europeans being first-time visitors to Scotland. If we look at visitors from France, this figure rises to around 64% who are first-timers, and we also know that around 1 in 10 Europeans are also regular visitors to Scotland. Our Europeans have the youngest age profile of all our markets, with more than a quarter being in the youngest age category of 16 to 34. And this is also reflected in the proportion of visitors who were students or in full-time education. Our first-time visitors from Europe were also much more likely to be younger. Almost 3/4 of Europeans were touring around Scotland, staying in 2 or more places, with around a fifth staying in an urban town or city location. Visitors from Southern Europe, for example Spain or Italy, were much more likely to be staying in one urban location than those from Northern Europe, our French and German visitors. Europeans stay longer than visitors from the UK, with an average of 10.4 nights spent in Scotland. However, those visiting urban locations tended to have a shorter stay than those who were touring. And finally, let's look at our long-haul visitors. By long haul, I'm referring to Visit Scotland's key markets of the USA, Canada and Australasia. So this market is the most likely to be first-time visitors to Scotland, with 61%. For visitors from the USA, this is an even higher figure at 68% being first-timers. Our visitors from Australia are more likely to be repeat visitors, with only 47% being first-timers. And you may remember I mentioned at the beginning that some visitors were on the trip of a lifetime, and you can see that our longer haul markets were much more likely to be on that kind of trip compared to the 10% average. Finally, although we didn't focus on visitors who were travelling as part of an organised tour group, we did come across people who were doing some independent tourism away from their group, and we did interview those people. We came across more long-haul visitors who were travelling as part of an organised group tour than any other market. Like Europeans, our long-haul markets tend to be tourers staying in 2 or more places around Scotland. However, 15% did stay in one urban centre, so a town or city location, with Canadians the most likely market to be doing so at 19%. Our long-haul visitors stayed the longest on average of all our markets, with visitors from Australia and Canada most likely to be staying more than a 2-week period in Scotland. You can find much more in-depth information on this section and other topics on our website, visitscotland.org. Thanks.